Hello Internet, welcome to Check Chat 5.2. This is the second one with Mein Kampf. The last one was about the Trump-Hitler comparison and why it's kind of meaningless and inaccurate. But today, conversely, we're going to be reading directly from Mein Kampf and talking about how the MAGA movement was created basically pretty effectively off of Hitler's playbook, following a lot of the same, rules and strategies. And it's probably kind of all over the board here a little bit, but I'm going to try to stay in some relative kind of order, and I'll sort of read right from the book so that there's not too much interpretation. And again, this isn't going to be an answer or an explanation of everything, and some people might interpret things totally different than me or have a better understanding, etc. And so this is just same thing with all the Check Chats, trying to talk about things where there seem to be gaps in conversation. And I thought that, like I said before, I read Mein Kampf, I felt compelled to, and there are just a lot of things that stuck out with me. And so, with that being said, I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to give the page numbers. Again, this one's going to be, my own copy, but you should be able to find the correlating, excerpts in whatever copy you have. This one's the, Houghton Mifflin Company, Boston, Massachusetts, 1939, 7th impression. So, but, should be able to, again, find at least where I'm talking about it if you want to read closer or read more around whatever the paragraphs or so I do to get a better context. So, anyway, jumping in, I apologize. We're going to start on page 854, and towards the last paragraph, and it's going to start out talking about how other movements fail due to greed, ego, things like this, and also talking about how to sort of supplant your movement onto an existing movement. Let's see. Out of the basic stock of the old movement, it has to fill not only all the most important positions of the conquered structure, but also to form the entire leadership. And this has to be continued until the previous principles and doctrines of the party have become the foundation and the content of the new state. Only then can one hand over the reins to the special constitution of this state born of its spirit. But this in turn is carried out only in mutual struggle, since it is a question less of human knowledge than of the play of the effective energies, which, though recognized from the very beginning, can nevertheless not be guided forever. All great movements, whether they be of religious or political character, have to ascribe their enormous success only to the realization and the application of these principles, but especially all durable successes are unthinkable without considering these laws, right? And so when we look at the MAGA movement, it started off as sort of in tangent with or to Republicans, right? It was a sprout of Republicans, and the idea of MAGA, just like this says, was to start something that was kind of in line with something else, take over its structure for all intents and purposes, right? Keep the foundation, which is the voters of the Republican Party, and destroy the House and destroy the the structure it's built itself. Keep the base, destroy the structure, rebuild your own structure on top of that same base, right? Replacing leadership, replacing its doctrines, and that becomes the new content, right? And so MAGA never would have gone anywhere had it not had started off aligned with Republicans, and then slowly what it did was more and more Republican leaders, as they saw MAGA gaining popularity, sort of on their side, right? Because against Democrats, they were both against Democrats. They had that similar enemy. More and more party Republicans had to agree with and support and all this stuff, the MAGA movement, for their own success and for the collective success of against Democrats. Which is fine. That's how the game's played. But then once MAGA was strong and large enough and had enough, clout and power and this and that, it started replacing, and it started, to do all this stuff that it says, replace all the leadership, all the most important power positions, replacing the doctrine with your own, and again, keeping that base. I think Hitler kind of even says it's impossible to create a new party. You look at the Green Party, you look at the Bull Moose Party, you look at the Pickle Party, you look at all these different parties that are third parties, and because they're trying to do their own thing, they have ultimately failed. There are no third party presidents, right? It's just not something that happens. Even something as huge, it talks about religious organizations, something as huge as Christianity, right? The foundation of Christianity is Judaism. So it started off with a base, and then it, sort of created its own thing. But, obviously now there's Judaism and Christianity. They certainly don't align, but there could have been no Christianity and success of Christianity without the foundation of Judaism. Let's see. Sorry, I'm going to be bouncing back and forth here. I apologize for that, but we're doing our best. I'm also going to go as quickly as possible, but try not to miss anything. Next is going to be 564. Let's see. It is always one's sole care which drives either towards renewed establishment of programs or towards changing those that exist. All right, it is always one's sole care that drives either towards renewed establishment of programs or towards changing those that exist. That the fear of the result of the next election, and this is true forever. Yes, as soon as in the heads of those parliamentary state artists the fear dawns that the beloved people revolts once more and tries to slip out of the harness of the old party carriage, they repaint the shafts. Repaint the shafts just means they slap a new coat of paint on the same old carriage and try to present it like something new. Then the stargazers and the party astrologers come, the so-called experienced and shrewd, quoted here in his words, mostly old parliamentarians who are able to remember analogous cases in their rich years of political experience, when finally the masses' patience was up, and who now feel that something similar menacingly approaches. Therefore, they take up the old prescriptions. They form a committee. They go about listening among the dear people. They put their noses into the products of the press, and so they gradually scent what the dear great people would like to have, what it detests, and what it hopes for. Every professional group, every class of employees is minutely studied and searched as to their most secret wishes. Also, the evil slogans of the dangerous opposition are then suddenly ripe for an examination, and not infrequently, to the greatest astonishment of their original inventors and propagators, that appear quite innocently and naturally in the treasury of knowledge of the old parties. And so this is just kind of describing what both parties sort of do. Both parties kind of know who their constituents are. And so once elections come around, we start, seeing obviously more interviews, more questions, more like, we have town halls, we this is what polls are for. What are you most concerned with? Economy, LGBT rights, voting issues, gun rights, et cetera, et cetera. And so each party sniffs out and figures out the most significant talking points, but is also trying to cover all the other talking points as well, so that they get as many votes as possible, because they're terrified of losing the election, right? And thus the committees are formed, and they revise the old program and issue a new one, whereby the gentlemen change their convictions in a way in which the soldier in a trench changes his shirt, namely when it is swarming with lice, in which everyone is given what is everybody's. The peasant receives protection for his agriculture, the industrialist protection for his products, the consumer protection for his purchases, the teacher's salaries are increased, the officials' pensions are raised, widows and orphans are to be taken care of to the greatest extent by the state, traffic is promoted, the tariffs are to be lowered, and even the taxes are to be abolished, though not completely, but almost. Sometimes it happens that one has nevertheless forgotten one class, or that one has not heard a demand current among the people. And then at the last moment, one patches in where there's room until, with a clean conscience, one may hope that one has calmed and has greatly satisfied the host of the normal petty bourgeois and their womenfolk. Thus armed in one's mind with confidence in the dear Lord and the unshakable stupidity of the bourgeois entitled to vote, one can begin the struggle for the new shaping of the Reich, so to speak. And so this is just talking about, again, just plugging in every talking point you can to get everyone. And this is a complaint of Hitler, right? He's saying that, you know, the old parties, all they do is every time an election comes around, they pretend that they care again, and this is on both sides. And then they spout a bunch of lies that sounds good to everybody, whoever they're trying to get a vote for, and even bleed over into the people that might be shakeable on the other side. You know, even just the moderates or the moderate Republicans switching over to Dem, moderate Dem switching over to Republican, whatever. And then, you know, trying to, again, just cover bases with business as usual, politics is politics. Once the election day is over and the parliamentarians have had their last people's meeting for 5 years to come, then in order to turn from the training of the masses towards the fulfillment of the higher and more agreeable tasks, the program committee is dissolved and the reshaping of the affair is again given the forms of the struggle for the dear daily bread. This, with the parliamentarian, is called diets. And so the 5 years is 4 for our elections. So it's saying once the election is over, you know, the loser is going to go on and complain about the winner, and the winner is going to get rid of all those committees that they just started, drop the polls, and then go back to business as usual, which is everyone struggling, you know, for their life. And it's interesting too, because like so much of this book you can kind of agree with, because he was a citizen, he was he was a soldier, and so he's making a lot of observations that probably a lot of people agree with, but then he kind of goes on and you're like, oh yeah, that's right, this is Hitler, he's like a crazy person, which is interesting. You know, it's interesting to almost kind of agree with them in very, very limited ways. Let's see, we're going to jump to page 486. I'm actually going to start with the last sentence on 485, and this is talking about how two movements cannot survive at the same time, like in tandem. Let's see. For no matter what one may say of the equality of the two movements, and here we're going to talk about MAGA and Republican. In reality, it never exists. For if it did, it would practically be not two, but one movement. No matter where the differences lie, and if they root only in the different abilities of the leaders, they exist. The coupling of the two not quite equal formations does not correspond to the natural law of evolution, but the victory of the stronger in this tense struggle and the breeding of the strength and the force of the victor made possible by this. By uniting two approximately equal political formations, there may arise momentary advantages, but success gained in this way is the cause of inner weaknesses appearing later. So uniting two approximately equal political formations, MAGA and Republican, arise momentary advantages, defeating the Democrats. All right. The greatness of a movement is exclusively guaranteed by the unrestricted development of its inner strength and by the latter's permanent increase up to its final victory over all competitors. And so he's talking about Darwinism, political Darwinism. There can't be multiple different movements working at the same time towards slightly different goals. They will fracture at some point, they will bicker, they will fight, they will come to blows. One will be stronger than the other and survive, and the other will go away. It might come back later, but it will at least succumb to whoever the strongest party is. Yes, one can even say that its strength and with its justification of existence increases only as long as it acknowledges the principle of fight as the presumption of its development, and that it has passed the climax of its strength in the movement when the complete victory is on its side. Thus it is only useful for a movement to aspire to this victory in a form which does not lead to a momentary victory, but which gives it a long period of growth due to the long duration of the struggle caused by absolute intolerance. And so it's saying it's not just, you can't just be happy with winning the election, right? You have to, every single opponent or different group is an enemy, and every single one of those has to be defeated. And once you have absolute victory, then you can, you know what I'm saying, like, this is how you're able to like stay and grow and root, because this is talking about having one party, right? Hitler didn't want to share Germany with other parties to compete against. He was looking for one nation, one Reich, one party, right? Which is something we can kind of see happening with the MAGA movement here, trying to destroy everything else around it instead of creating competition and linking pictures and all that stuff. Let's see. Movements which owe their growth only to the so-called fusion of similar formations, that means compromises, are like hothouse plants. They shoot up, but they lack the strength to defy centuries and to resist heavy storms. The greatness of every powerful organization as the incorporation of an idea in this world is rooted in the religious fanaticism with which it intolerably enforces itself against everything else, fanatically convinced of its own right. If an idea is right in itself, and if thus armed it embarks on the struggle in this world, it is invincible, and every persecution will lead to its inner strengthening. So this is saying that we're not just talking about creating a political party so that we can win an election. This is saying turning our political movement into a religion, and so that we can fanatically defend it to its death, and not just defend it, but lay waste to all others, right? And then it also saying it is invincible, and every persecution will lead to its inner strengthening. So it's also saying embrace persecution against those who are against us, because that only means that they are wrong and we are right, and we are ordained by God, and that will make us stronger. This next paragraph is great. The greatness of Christianity was not rooted in its attempted negotiations of compromise with perhaps similarly constructed philosophical opinions of the old world, but in its inexorably fanatical preaching and representation of its own doctrine. Okay, its greatness is not attributed to negotiations or compromise, but its unwavering fanatical preaching and representation. Okay. Let's see. The movement has to educate its members in principle in a way that in the fight they do not see something that has been negligently put together, but something that is aimed at. Therefore, they must not fear the hostility of the adversaries, but they should perceive it as a presumption for the justification of their own existence. They must not shun the hatred of the enemies of our nationality and our view of life and its expressions, but they should long for it. But to the expressions of this hatred, lie and calumny also begin, right? And so this is saying that the followers of the new movement have to, like I said, not just absorb other people's ridicule, but wear it like a badge of honor, because that is the heathens telling you that they are going to try to take away your righteousness, right? This is why Trump put his mugshot in the White House, right? Not because he thought it was a good picture, and maybe he did, but because that is how he portrays his strength, like Hitler says, and says when they try to cast us down, it's only going to make us stronger because we are backed by God. We have this religious fanaticism that says we are so right that when they say we're wrong, that makes us even more right. Let's see. Jumping now to page 675. And I know all this stuff is going to have way more conversation to it. There's a lot here. I'm trying to just kind of cover it so that if anyone hears anything that, they're interested in, they're able to kind of check it out. But I know I'm going over things as quickly as possible, so this video isn't 15 hours long. So, what is this thing? Let's find out where we're going here. Page 675, and right at the top, first paragraph. An existing condition is not abolished by the mere stress and presentation of a future condition, for one cannot presume that the adherents of, or even those interested in, the presently existing condition will be completely converted and won for the new condition merely by stating that there is a necessity. On the contrary, it may happen too easily that then two conditions remain side by side, and therefore so-called view of life becomes a party, out of the frame of which it will not be able to free itself. For the view of life is intolerant and cannot be content with the role of a party among others, but it demands dictatorially that it be acknowledged exclusively and completely, and that the entire public life be completely readjusted according to its own views. Therefore, it cannot tolerate the simultaneous existence of a representation of the former condition. Okay, and so this is continue on saying there's a difference between a party and a view of life, right? A party is in it for the money, a party is in it for the power, a party wants to have a career in politics and lie and not change anything. A view of life is something that you live by. It's a belief system that people can religiously, fanatically, violently, vehemently, proudly, strongly stand behind and fight for to the end. Okay? It cannot tolerate the simultaneous existence of a representation of the former condition, right? It rejects everything else. There's only one God, one party, one truth, one right. Everything else is wrong. And if they try to infiltrate or expand that, then we're going to put them in prison, we're going to squash them, we're going to kill them, we're going to, send them away, or whatever. There can be only one correct way, right? Exactly the same applies to religions. Christianity also could not content itself with building up its own altar. It was compelled to proceed to destroying the heathen altars. Only out of this fanatical intolerance could an apodictic creed form itself. That just means certain. And this intolerance is even its absolute presupposition, right? So Christianity couldn't content itself with building up its own altar. So it couldn't just become a successful religion. It had to destroy all heathen religions, even religions that believe in the same God but have different modes of achieving it or whatever. And Christianity to this day is, obviously not as vehemently, but, more people have been killed in the name of God than anything else, right? And so this is something that we don't have to argue. It's just a fact. Christianity found its success by wiping out heathens, by wiping out, all the tiny little woodland religions, all the, whatever. We know the history of Christianity. And so he's just comparing that. He's comparing, again, the idea of a political party and a way of life, and then likening a way of life to a religion and comparing a political party to a religion and saying, if you want to create your own political party, turn it into a religion. This is why it will succeed. And he, was not wrong. Clearly, we've seen throughout the world and throughout history that example being used. All right, I'm going to jump to page 715. 715, first paragraph. The mass meeting is necessary, if only for the reason that in it the individual who, in becoming an adherent of a new movement, feels lonely and is easily seized with the fear of being alone, receives for the first time the pictures of a greater community, something that has a strengthening and encouraging effect on most people. The same man in the frame of a company or a battalion, surrounded by all his comrades, would set out on an attack with a lighter heart than he would if he left entirely to himself. In the crowd, he always feels a little sheltered, even if in reality 1,000 reasons would speak against it. And so this one's talking about, again, the formation of the party, and the importance of the mass meeting. And the importance of the mass meeting is, if you're kind of fringe, if you're saying things a little crazy, but people are agreeing with you, a lot of career people, family people, religious people might balk or might hesitate to agree or join you in a physical way. But in a mass meeting, you're going to feel more comfortable. 10 people are more comfortable overthrowing someone than one person, and 100 people are more comfortable throwing someone over than 10, right? And so physical numbers makes a difference, because it emboldens those that might otherwise hesitate, and you might end up losing kind of in the wash. And we can also see very comfortably that Trump ascribes to this. Hitler's meetings started out with 12 people, then 20, then 40, then 60, then 100, then up to 20,000 people. And so it slowly grew, and the reasons that it grew is because people could see these numbers growing in the town halls, in the bars that they would meet at, right? If he was just giving out pamphlets and knew that people were maybe like signing up with their emails or whatever, right, then you could see the numbers grow. But the way that you make the numbers grow is by showing the growing numbers, right? We see Trump talking about his crowd sizes all the time, and sometimes misrepresenting them, because you can't say, well, we had a smaller crowd here than we did over here, because that means that people might be shying away, which would take people that are on the fringe of the fringe and maybe lose them. So if every time he says we're having bigger and bigger and bigger, then those people that are still just outside the box but agree with a bunch of stuff, even though they disagree with a bunch of stuff, well, if they see everyone else is doing it, they're gonna hang out with all the cool kids and join the party. And that's just kind of human nature, right? And so, but it's very much spelled out here, and it's obviously quite effective. I'm going to jump a few pages back to 711. Let's see, sorry. Let's see. The same purpose. Okay, so this is going to be talking about really interestingly, and I think this is something that Hitler must have kind of found through going to church and holding his own meetings, but this is about briefly, like, understanding when and how people can be most easily manipulated, and he's found it at night. Blah blah blah. It seems that in the morning and even during the day, men's willpower revolts with the highest energy against an attempt at being forced under another's will and another's opinion. In the evening, however, they succumb more easily to the dominating force of a stronger will. For truly every such meeting presents a wrestling match between two opposed forces. The superior oratorical talent of a domineering apostolic nature will succeed more easily in winning for the new will people who themselves have in turn experienced a weakening of their force of resistance in the most natural way than people who still have full command of the energies of their minds and willpower. So this is just basically saying that for whatever reason at night, when people kind of feel more in control of their time, they're going to be more open to giving themselves to a pastor or a politician, someone trying to persuade them because they feel like that's their time and they're giving it to them instead of, in the daytime or in the morning time when they feel like their time is being taken from them, which is just a really, really interesting observation, I think. The same purpose serves also in the artificially created and yet mysteriously dusk of the Catholic churches, to burn candles, incense, censers, etc. In this wrestling match between the orator and the opponent to be converted, the speaker will gradually obtain that wonderful sensibility for the psychological conditions of propaganda, which the writer nearly always lacks. Literature, therefore, by its more limited effect, will in general serve more the preservation, strengthening, and deepening of an already existing attitude or opinion. All really great historical changes have not been brought about through the written word, but have at the utmost been accompanied by it. Okay, and so he goes on to talk about the French Revolution and say, well, it wouldn't have happened with philosophical theory. So we can even sort of put the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025 in with this as the academic literature part of it. If the Heritage Foundation released this 1,000-page document and said, this is what we're going to do, no one would read it, and it'd be really easy to argue and really difficult to just get people to get on board with. But if you have a speaker that gets a whole bunch of people behind him, or her, or whatever, then something like Project 2025 can be the sort of the notes that the speaker in whatever his oratory skills sort of projects, right? And so he can talk about these things in a way that the people understand and that they enjoy, even though they may or may not be misled in small ways. But you need the speaker, you need the orator to start the revolution, and then after that the academic stuff will kind of fall into place. Let's see. The people of illiterates has really not been enthused for the communist revolution by the rhetorical or the theoretical literature of Karl Marx, but only by the glittering heaven that thousands of agitators, although all of them in the service of an idea, described to the people. And so that's a similar thing too that we have here, like people don't get super stoked on Project 2025 because they've read Project 2025 or because the heads of Project 2025 have in any way reached out to them, but thousands of agitators, right? And so MAGA as a movement also has a bunch of, like, we modern day, and Twitter helped Trump get elected with his mass groups. You could see how many numbers were following, you could see how many people liked this post, and so that's kind of like his mass movement thing where people, the masses are easier to grow with more masses. But we also see that there were a whole bunch of even podcasters, right? Even conspiracy theorists. We have guys like Mike Lindell. We have, let's see. I mean, I can't even remember all their names. The guy with the Nixon tattoo on his back, and we have Lars Larson. We have just like tons and tons of people that are out there. Even like Shapiro and Anthony Tate and all these like less savory characters, but they're extremely influential. And so like Hitler says, the revolution wasn't achieved through theoretical literature, Karl Marx, but by the glittering heaven that thousands of agitators, although all of them in the service of an idea, describe to the people, right? So the thousands of agitators are vastly more important than the actual piece of literature, because the literature is more difficult to achieve, and the agitators just get people on board by agitating. And let's see, back to measure. This next piece is really interesting too. Let's see. He's talking about he gives a small anecdote with two different speakers, and whatever their names are doesn't matter. But one is a speaker of the people, and one is an academic that doesn't have a good grasp on, I don't know, like what, the way that the people speak or think or whatever. It's more like an academic, like, a professor or something like that. And so, so he's kind of comparing, Hitler's kind of comparing these two speakers and talking about how one succeeded and one does not. And so, that where genius is concerned, he was not only adequate, but 1,000 times superior to a Bethman Hallwig. Lloyd George, the successful one, proved by finding in his speeches that form and those expressions which opened to him the heart of his people, and which made this people ultimately serve entirely his will. The very primitiveness of his language, the originality of his expressions, and the applications of easily understandable, most simple examples contain the proof that the superior political ability of this Englishman. For I have to measure the speech of a statesman to his people, not by the impression that it leaves with a university professor, but according to the effect that it exercises on the people. And this alone also furnishes the measure of a speaker's genius, right? And so all this is saying that, like, the reason that Trump succeeded very wildly is because he talked at a level that everyone could understand, even the lowest common denominator. And in fact, when you look at it, most academics, most people that know what they're talking about, disagree greatly with what Trump has to say in a lot of stuff. But he says it enthusiastically. He says it in very simple terms. And he gets people on his side, whereas like someone who comes out, someone for the SEC or someone, like who works for the Fed are going to try to give you numbers and explanations and definitions. And a lot of times when you're in a fight for your life, in this kind of context, that's just not going to work. And there's even a small clip from a radio show that's a quote of Trump saying, I love the poorly educated. And that's who he's really able to speak to, because he's not good at explaining things well. He doesn't really have a great understanding of a lot of what he's talking about. And like if you were trying to reach out to just the academics, they would all be sitting there sort of scratching their heads being like, what is this guy talking about? He clearly doesn't know what tariffs are. He's clearly never been in an electric or like a boat with a battery with sharks in it, because that sort of rant was crazy. He doesn't, he just doesn't have like that full grasp that, you would expect a leader to have. But that's why he's very, very, very good at being able to get people on his side. He's a great rabble-rouser. Let's see. 12, 7:15. All right, let's see. We're getting close. Sorry. 7:06. We're going to start with the last sentence of 7:05. And only by this kind of adaptability the written word approaches the spoken word. The speaker may, for instance, treat the same subject as that of a book, yet if he is a great and ingenious popular speaker, he will hardly twice repeat in the same manner one of the same subject, matter, and material. He will always let himself be carried by the great masses in such a manner that he senses just those words that he needs in order to speak to the hearts of his respective listeners. But if he errs, no matter how slightly, he has always before him the living correction. As mentioned previously, he is able to read from the expressions of his listeners, firstly, whether they understand what he speaks, secondly, whether they are able to follow what he said, and thirdly, in how far he has convinced them of the correctness of what he said. If he sees, firstly, that they do not understand him, then he will become so primitive and so clear in his explanation that even the least intelligent is bound to understand him. If he feels, secondly, that they are not able to follow him, then he will build up his ideas so carefully and slowly that even the weakest among them does not remain behind any longer. And thirdly, as soon as he guesses that they do not seem to be convinced of the correctness of what he said, he will repeat this so often in so many new examples, he himself will bring in their objections, which he feels although they have not been uttered, and he will refute them and disperse them, till finally the last group of an opposition, merely by its attitude and its expressions, let him recognize its capitulation in the face of his argumentation. And so that one is basically just, as it says, the speaker has the advantage of being able to make changes as he's speaking in real time, in reaction to his audience, whether it's an interviewer or whether it's a town hall or a mega group or whatever. And this is where we see Trump succeed but also fail, right? Again, he's a really good rabble rouser, which means that he's very able to read his audience, and when he finds something they like, that they clap on, something like that, he can continue on with that. But we also see the reason he's a failure. I'm not trying to give him too much credit, but Adolf Hitler was a pretty intelligent person. I think that most people that were educated back in the day just got a better, more well-rounded education in general. And we see Trump repeating the same thing over and over and over, A, because it's a lie, and B, because a lot of people aren't convinced of it, and C, because it's just like a lot of it's inaccurate and easily proven wrong, right? He had to say the Haitians were eating the dogs so many times because it was just proved wrong over and over and over. He had to say that the election was rigged so many times, and still does to this day, because it's just not believable. And he has to continue to press that on his own people in as many ways as possible, because there's just so much evidence against it. And so again, we see, the strategies that Hitler's talking about in being a successful orator, and then comparing it to Trump, where he's basically doing the same things. And so we're seeing where he's able to find success, but also where he's kind of faltering, and in a different time with a different population probably would not work as well. This is going to be the last one, and thank you for hanging out with me. This is page 505, and I'm just going to kind of pop into it, and this will be a quick one. Let's see. At the beginning of 1920, I was holding the very first great mass meeting. There were many differences in opinions about this. Some of the leading party members considered the matter as much too premature, and therefore looked upon the effect as disastrous. The Red Press had begun to occupy itself with us, and we were happy enough to gradually gain its hatred. We had begun to appear as discussion speakers in other meetings. Of course, each of us was immediately shouted down. Nevertheless, we were successful. One learned to know us, and in the measure in which this knowledge deepened, the aversion and the wrath against us grew. So this is talking about how in the early movement, they were mostly rabble rousers, and they would show up to other meetings and say their objections or give their points of views, and they were mostly shot down. And he's talking about how every time he was shot down, that gained his popularity a little bit more. This is very much like Trump. He would come and say some crazy thing that would be against everyone else, and we would be like, okay, calm down, weirdo, you're kind of an idiot, and that would only make his base stronger because he would stick with it. And if he resonated with 3% of the population, he might gain half of them, and if he just keeps doing that, he'll just build and build and build. Therefore, we had reason to hope that our first great mass meeting, we would receive the visit of our friends from the Red Camp to a great extent, Red Camp being their enemies. I, too, was clear about the fact that there was a great possibility that the meeting would be blown up. But the struggle had to be carried out, if not now, then a few months later. It was up to us to perpetuate the movement, even from the first day, by blindly and ruthlessly standing up for it. I knew, above all, the mentality of the adherents of the Red side only too well not to know that a resistance to the limit that a resistance to the limit not only makes an impression, but also wins adherence. Therefore, one had to be resolved to make this resistance. All right. The resistance to the limit not only makes an impression, but wins adherence, right? And so the more you're arguing against whatever the ruling classes are, not only will you make more enemies, but you will also gain more followers. You know, bigger, louder, pound the chest. You know, that's all for Mein Kampf right now. And hopefully it wasn't too horrible. But I think that there were just some really interesting similarities there that, you know, it's too late right now. MAGA's already created and it's pretty much already done what it was supposed to do. Interestingly enough, most likely by the time I put this up, Trump won't even need MAGA anymore. And there's a good chance that other people try to take the MAGA reins, even though there is no MAGA without Trump currently. I don't see that happening. But it's just really interesting, the similar mentalities of Trump and creating MAGA and Hitler and creating the Nazi Party, right? Not just making it a political party, but making it into a way of life. Make America great again. We're going to resonate back from the old stuff. We're going to change everything. And then when he, you know, took hold, he put all of his own people in, and they were all basically just his own sycophants, just people that would do whatever he said blindly. And so they took the base, the foundation of the Republican Party, and were invited inside and slowly picked off all the family members, all the party members, replaced them with their own, and took down the walls and built them back up the way that they wanted to. And now we kind of have this really interesting, very similarly created, very similarly motivated MAGA party in the United States as we did the Nazi Party in Germany. And I think that, you know, even a handful of these things are worth examining by people that know much more than me. But, you know, should hopefully raise some questions and get you to look a little bit further into it. And that being said, I feel like I've said enough today. And yeah, thanks.